My name is Claire Thompson, and the night my husband raised a toast to his mistress. I smiled and handed him his downfall. I can still hear the sound of that glass hitting the floor. It was loud enough to stop the music. Marcus was standing there in his tuxedo, the perfect man in a perfect life, except he wasn't. He had just raised his glass and said, "This year's success belongs to my future wife, Emily." For a second, no one moved. Not the board, not the waiters, not even the band. Then someone clapped soft and confused, and the whole room followed, like they didn't know what else to do. I was sitting right in front of him. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just stood up, fixed the strap of my dress, and smiled. "Cheers," I said, "to your last speech as CEO. You could have heard a pin drop after that." Emily froze. The board looked at each other like they'd just seen a ghost. Marcus blinked, trying to keep his grin steady, and then I handed him a folder. He thought it was a gift. It wasn't. Inside was everything he'd built his arrogance on and everything I'd taken back. People always ask how it feels to destroy a man in public. It doesn't feel like fire. It feels like exhaling after holding your breath for too many years. When he opened the folder, he went pale. The microphone slipped from his hand and hit the floor. That sound still echoes sometimes when I close my eyes. He tried to speak, but all that came out was air. Security moved toward him, and the music stopped again. That was the night it all ended. But the truth is, it didn't start there. It started 2 years before that, in a quiet restaurant on a Tuesday night. We were supposed to be celebrating our anniversary, but Marcus spent the whole dinner talking about his company. He loved that company more than he ever loved me. He said success was about sacrifice. What he meant was my sacrifice. When the bill came, he slid it to me. "Practice for independence," he said, smiling. My card declined. He laughed, then said it was the system's fault. That night I couldn't sleep. I watched him snore like nothing had happened, and I thought, this is the moment. Not the affair, not the lies. This tiny, cruel laugh at my expense. People think revenge starts with anger. It doesn't. It starts with clarity. The next morning I opened my laptop, and for the first time I looked at our finances, not as a wife, but as a partner who'd been replaced. I learned passwords, timelines, accounts, all the things he assumed I was too soft to understand. Marcus loved to talk about control. He said he ran his company like a symphony. He didn't notice the person tuning the instruments. Over the next few months, I watched patterns meetings that ended too late receipts that didn't match travel dates, hotel charges labeled client expense. He used the company credit card for everything, even for love. So I did what any reasonable woman would do. I smiled, nodded, and started documenting. I became invisible on purpose. You'd be surprised how much power there is in being ignored. I wasn't planning a scene. I was planning freedom. 2 years. 2 years of patience, paper trails, and silence. Until that night. That night in the ballroom when the man who once told me I wasn't strategic enough gave me the perfect stage to prove him wrong. When I walked out of that room, I didn't feel like a winner. I felt empty and then free. They say every ending needs a climax, but mine was just one sound, a glass's scream, and the quiet after. That's where my story begins. 3 days after the gala, he still hadn't called. Not a text, not a message through his lawyer, just silence. The news did what news always does. It chewed up the moment and spit it out as something smaller, something easy to scroll past. CEO's marriage. Ends in public meltdown. That was the headline. They called me the wife who smiled. I didn't correct them. Sometimes the version they invent is gentler than the truth. The board called a meeting the next morning. Some faces looked sympathetic. Others looked like calculators. Business doesn't grieve, it adjusts. They asked me if I wanted to make a statement. I said no. I'd already said everything that mattered, and it wasn't through a microphone. I remember standing in front of the mirror that night, still wearing the same dress from the gala, the zipper stuck halfway. The fabric smelled like champagne and ending. I just looked at myself for a long time. Not judging, not pitying, just seeing. It's strange how much of your life can fit into a folder. That same folder, the one I handed him, was now sitting on my kitchen counter next to a mug that said Mrs. Thompson, CFO's wife. The irony wasn't lost on me. I opened my laptop and checked my inbox. Emails from reporters, colleagues, friends I hadn't heard from in years. Every subject line said the same thing in a different way. Are you okay? I wasn't. But I was something better aware. When you spend years with someone who loves power, you forget what silence sounds like. Silence used to scare me. Now it felt like clean air. On the fourth day, a delivery arrived. A single envelope. No name, just the company letterhead. Inside was a resignation letter his. Typed, signed, dated the night of the gala. He must have known it was over the moment I stood up. Men like Marcus always think they'll talk their way out until someone walks out instead. I didn't celebrate. I made coffee black and drank it cold. By noon, the board had called again. They wanted me to help stabilize things. That's corporate code for clean up the wreckage without taking credit. I said yes, not out of loyalty, out of clarity. If he'd built his empire on my back, I might as well stand tall now that he'd fallen. That week was a blur of signatures, audits, and whispers. HR sent me flowers for strength. PR sent me drafts for image. And one junior analyst, a girl barely 25, slipped a note under my door. It said, "We saw how he treated you. We're glad you didn't stay quiet." I kept that note. It meant more than any press release. The first time I stepped into his office, now mine, I expected to feel triumph. I didn't. It smelled like old cologne and new dust. His chair squeaked the same way. The computer still had his password saved. He never thought I'd sit there. I didn't touch anything right away. I just opened the blinds. Light filled the room like truth unwanted, but honest. I looked out over the city he once called his kingdom. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't part of it. I was above it. That night I slept on the couch. Couldn't bring myself to go to the bed we'd shared. Every corner of that house was a reminder. His toothbrush still there, his shoes by the door, his voice still echoing in places where I used to be small. I thought about throwing everything out. Instead, I opened another folder. This one was personal, my own. Photos, bank statements, emails, all the things I'd kept quiet about for years. Not to use, not yet. Just to remember who I was before I started apologizing for being smart. People think revenge is about anger. They're wrong. It's about remembering. It's about looking at the pieces of your life and deciding which ones were never yours to carry. By the weekend, my nameplate was on the CEO's desk. Temporary, they said. Interim. But interim is just another word for until we realize she can handle it. I didn't smile for the photo. They didn't deserve one yet. That night my phone buzzed. His name on the screen. I didn't answer. I just watched it ring, and for the first time, I didn't feel anything. No rage, no regret, just peace, the kind that comes when you stop trying to fix something that was never broken in your hands to begin with. 3 days after the gala, he still hadn't called. Not even a message. You'd think after that kind of public disaster, he'd try to explain himself. He didn't. Marcus always believed silence made him look powerful. The press didn't. The tabloids had his face everywhere. CEO's wife exposes affair at company gala. They called me the smiling widow of ambition. I wasn't dead. Just done. But it's strange. When we first met, he wasn't that man at all. We were both 28. I was working as a junior financial analyst. He was the new operations manager. Sharp suit, calm voice, every hair in place. He held doors open, sent flowers for no reason, and made me feel like my opinion mattered. He'd ask things like, "If this were your company, what would you change first?" And I'd answer. And he'd actually listen. That's what made me fall for him, not the charm, but the attention. It felt rare, honest. He'd cook for me on Sundays, badly, but he'd try. We'd sit on the kitchen floor eating burnt pancakes, talking about the kind of future where work didn't own us. He proposed in that same kitchen flower still on his hands. He said we'll build something big together, and I believed him. We did build it at first. We worked late side by side. He ran operations. I handled the books. We grew the company from a rented office to a glass tower downtown. The first time the company made $1 million in profit, he said we did it. By the time it made 10, he said I did it. That's when the change began, quiet, steady, almost polite. He stopped asking what I thought. He started explaining instead. He bought a second car. He didn't need a watch that cost more than my yearly salary back then. I told myself it was stress. Success can make people strange. But it wasn't success. It was hunger, the kind that eats empathy first. He started staying late at the office. At first I believed him. Then I stopped asking. He said, "You've changed," and I thought, "No, you just stopped looking." The night I found the first receipt, a hotel on a Thursday, I didn't confront him. I folded it neatly, put it in a box with a note, "Keep your promises somewhere safe." That was the beginning of my silence. My lawyer, Denise, was an old friend from college. She'd handled enough corporate divorces to recognize the pattern. She said, "You're not ready to leave yet. You're getting ready to win." We started quietly. Paperwork filings, corporate structures. I learned more about shareholder rights in 6 months than Marcus learned in his whole career. He thought he was the empire. He forgot who drafted the blueprints. I kept my tone soft, my smile steady. We still attended events together. People said, "You two make such a power couple." And I'd nod thinking, yes, power, just not shared anymore. The night before the gala, I stood in front of the mirror adjusting my dress. He walked by and said, "Try the silver one. It photographs better." I wore the red one. It wasn't about color, it was about choice. Back to now, after the gala, after the silence. The company's board met on Monday. They asked if I'd step in temporarily until things stabilized. I said yes. Not because I wanted his chair, but because it was already mine. That week felt like walking through smoke, everything familiar, but blurred. Reporters waited outside the building. Some shouted questions. Did you plan it? Was the affair real? I didn't answer. You can't reason with people who make a living out of noise. At night, the house was too quiet. I left the TV on just to have voices in the room. The couch became my bed. The kitchen became my therapist. I'd pour a glass of wine and stare at the folder, that same folder I'd handed him. Every page a reminder of how many times I'd been right and stayed quiet. People ask why I didn't just leave. Because leaving is emotional. Taking back what's yours, that's justice. The first call from his lawyer came on day 4. Polite voice, full of negotiation tricks. "Mr. Thompson wishes to resolve matters privately," he said. I told him, "Tell your client I don't resolve, I conclude." He didn't call again. I kept going to work. One morning I found a sticky note on my desk from the receptionist. "We're proud of you." Simple words. But they felt heavier than any apology Marcus ever gave me. In meetings, I spoke less. Silence carries weight when people know you've earned it. The men who used to interrupt me now waited for me to finish. It's funny how quickly respect grows once fear changes direction. On Friday, I met with Denise again. She said he's going to try something desperate. They always do. I asked, "What should I do?" She smiled. "Exactly what you're doing. Nothing." That night, I opened my laptop and read the email drafts Marcus had saved in the company system messages to investors, to lawyers, to Emily. All written like he was still in control. The irony, he never once changed the password I set years ago. Control really is just confidence with bad security. When I finally shut the laptop, the city outside was quiet. Streetlights hummed, a siren wailed somewhere far away, and I realized this was the first week in years I hadn't apologized for anything. I wasn't free yet, but I was no longer trapped. There's a difference, and as I turned off the light, I thought back to that kitchen years ago. His hands covered in flour, his voice soft, his promise still unbroken. For a second, I missed that version of him. Then I remembered that man never existed. He was just the dream I built before I learned to read the fine print. The week after the gala felt like living underwater. Everything looked normal, but every sound came late, muffled, slow. The press wouldn't let go. They camped outside my office waiting for a statement. Some wanted sympathy, others wanted blood. That's what happens when a woman breaks the rules of humiliation. They want to see if she bleeds regret. I didn't give them either. No interviews, no quotes, just silence. But silence has a cost. People start filling it with their own stories. Maybe she planned it for months. Maybe she's heartbroken. Maybe she's worse than he is. The truth was quieter. I was tired of performing, of pretending, of surviving with grace. The company's PR team begged me to control the narrative. I told them, "You can't control truth. It just waits for everyone else to stop lying." Still, I couldn't sleep. Not because I missed Marcus, but because I missed the version of myself before all this, the woman who believed that love and fairness could coexist. One night I made tea at 2 a.m., sat at the kitchen table and stared at the folder that started it all. The papers, the signatures, the proof. It wasn't just evidence. It was a mirror every page reflected, the moment I stopped trusting. I used to think of myself as a moral person. I paid my taxes early, sent thank you notes, tipped well. But the past 2 years had turned me into someone else. Someone who calculated before she spoke, who smiled while memorizing every sentence for later use. That kind of control feels powerful until it starts to feel cold. A friend from college called me that week. She'd seen the footage. She said, "I hope it was worth it." I said, "What's worth?" She said, "Peace." I didn't answer. I didn't have one. The board insisted on a press conference. Optics, they called it. I stood in front of a row of microphones, the lights too bright, the questions already loaded. "Mrs. Thompson, do you regret what happened?" I looked at the sea of cameras and said, "I regret believing that silence could fix things." Then I walked away. The clip went viral, of course. Half the country called me brave. The other half called me vindictive. I didn't read the comments. I didn't need strangers to translate my own story. That weekend, I went back to church for the first time in years. I sat in the last row, hands in my lap, listening to the pastor talk about forgiveness. He said forgiveness isn't weakness. It's understanding who deserves your energy. I thought about Marcus, his laugh, his arrogance, his hollow apologies. I thought about Emily and the way she looked at me that night, not cruel, just lost. When the service ended, I stayed seated. An older woman turned to me and said, "You're that lady from TV." I smiled. Guilty. She patted my hand. Good. Sometimes the truth needs a microphone. I wanted to believe her. But truth also needs restraint. Every time I imagined Marcus losing everything, a small part of me wanted to feel joy, and another part felt sick. That's the thing about revenge. It gives you control for a minute, then asks if you're any better afterward. On Monday, the HR director stopped by my office. She said he's been calling around, looking for allies. I nodded. It didn't surprise me. Marcus never accepted endings, only pauses. After she left, I opened the window. The city smelled like rain and exhaust honest scents. I breathed in and asked myself, if I finish this fight, will I lose what's left of me? Denise, my lawyer, called that evening. His team's panicking, she said. They're trying to block the audit. Do you want me to push harder? I said, not yet. She paused. You're hesitating. I'm thinking, I said. About what, if justice still feels like justice when you start to enjoy it? She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, enjoyment doesn't make it wrong. You're not hurting him. You're ending what he started. Maybe. But endings don't always feel clean. Sometimes they taste like guilt in disguise. That night I found myself replaying memories I'd buried his hand on my back at a company dinner, the way he'd whisper plans for our future, the first time he said, we're unstoppable. He wasn't lying, we were once. Until he decided we meant him. I realized something, then I wasn't angry because he cheated. I was angry because he used my love as leverage. He weaponized trust, and I let him. The next morning I looked at myself in the mirror again. The woman staring back wasn't angry anymore. She was steady, tired, but steady. I went to the office early. The halls were quiet, only the hum of the cleaning crew. I left a note on Denise's desk, proceed, but keep it clean. Then I sat at my desk and opened my calendar. For the first time, I deleted every personal event that had his name in it. Anniversaries, dinners, reminders. Gone. It wasn't closure, it was correction. People think revenge ends with a scream, but sometimes it ends with a whisper that says, I did what I had to. I didn't want forgiveness. I wanted peace, and maybe finally they're not the same thing. The first envelope arrived on a Thursday. No name, no note, just my address, typed in perfect alignment like everything Marcus ever touched. Inside a lawsuit. Petition for division of marital and corporate assets. In plain English, he was suing me for stealing his company. I read it twice, then once more slower like you reread a threat to make sure it's real. It was. The news broke the next morning. Ex-CEO claims fraud by former spouse. A headline built for television. They loved it. Two good-looking people, one scandal, one empire. The first camera showed up outside my office before sunrise. By the time I got to work, my phone had 47 missed calls. Denise, my lawyer, was waiting by the door. She didn't say good morning. Just handed me a coffee and said he's playing offense. I laughed. He always did. She opened the file. He's alleging you used insider information, that you accessed private emails to remove him. He forgot those emails were company property, I said. She smiled. He also forgot you drafted that clause yourself. We spent the morning reviewing statements, dates, sign-offs, digital footprints. Marcus wanted a war. I had documentation. Still that night I couldn't sleep. It wasn't fear, it was fatigue. There's a particular exhaustion that comes from defending truth. It doesn't scream. It sighs. I kept thinking about the day we signed our first joint contract 10 years earlier. He'd taken my hand and said, "From now on, we win together." Now he was paying someone by the hour to unmake that sentence. The following week was a blur of conference calls and court filings. His new attorney, a man who smiled like a shark, went on TV to say I'd weaponized divorce. He used words like emotional instability and corporate overreach. I turned off the volume. You don't argue with echo chambers. At the preliminary hearing, Marcus looked thinner. He didn't make eye contact. His lawyer did all the talking. They presented charts, emails, even photos, screenshots of me entering the building at odd hours, proof of my secret meetings. I almost laughed. Those were meetings with auditors. Transparency can look suspicious when you're used to secrets. When it was my turn, Denise stood. She handed the judge a single binder. "Your Honor," she said, "our client isn't fighting for what's his. She's protecting what's already been stolen once." Inside that binder were signed transfers documents showing how Marcus had moved company funds into a shell account under Emily's name. Paper doesn't tremble when it tells the truth. The judge looked up. Marcus shifted in his chair, his jaw tight. His lawyer whispered something, but he didn't answer. Afterward, Denise and I sat in the courthouse cafe. She said, "He's cornered. Expect a smear campaign next." "Already started," I said, scrolling through headlines calling me the Ice Widow. The nickname made me laugh. I wasn't cold. I was consistent. A few nights later, Emily showed up at my apartment building. No cameras this time. She looked exhausted, wearing a coat too big for her. "He told me to warn you," she said, "about what he's going to leak things, private photos, emails. He said if he can't win, he'll ruin you." I nodded slowly. "Thank you." She hesitated. "You're not scared of exposure," I said. "I lived with him for 10 years. I've been exposed." She cried a little, apologized again. I didn't hug her. I just said, "Get a lawyer. You'll need one too." The leak never came. Maybe he realized humiliation was his own language, and I'd stopped speaking it. A month into the case, the board called a meeting. They were nervous. Investors were nervous. One director asked, "Can we settle quietly?" I said, "You can't whisper integrity." The room went still. That's the thing about calm people, they sound louder when everyone else is panicking. The second hearing was shorter. Marcus's lawyer tried a new tactic, painting me as manipulative calculating. He said Mrs. Thompson used her proximity to exploit her husband's trust. Denise looked at me. I stood up. "Trust isn't property," I said. He built the empire on my silence. I just stopped being quiet. The room froze. Even the court reporter paused. After that, there wasn't much left to argue. The financial records spoke for themselves. The judge dismissed half his claims by lunch. Marcus didn't stay for the end. He walked out before the ruling shoulders, stiff pride the only thing left, holding him upright. When it was over, Denise squeezed my arm. "You won." I shook my head. "No, I survived." Outside, the rain had started. Reporters waited by the steps, microphones ready. One of them shouted, "Do you feel victorious?" I kept walking. Halfway to the car, I turned and said, "No, I feel finished." That night back home, I sat at the same kitchen table where he once promised we'd build everything together. The rain tapped against the windows, steady as a clock. I looked at the folder again, my constant companion. For the first time, I wanted to burn it, but I didn't. You don't erase proof. You let it rest. Justice isn't a fireworks show. It's paperwork and patience. It's knowing the person who once thought they could destroy you now has to live with your quiet. As I turned off the lights, the city outside flickered in the distance. Somewhere out there, Marcus was still fighting shadows. And me, I was finally learning how to live without needing to win. Winning doesn't feel like I imagined. It's quieter, like a storm that leaves behind clean streets and broken trees. After the ruling, the cameras moved on. The story was old news in a week. But my phone still buzzed messages from strangers, mostly women. You gave me courage. I wish I could have done what you did. Some thanked me. Some warned me. All of them wanted to be heard. I tried to answer a few, then stopped. Because for every woman who called me strong, there was another who said I'd gone too far. And both were right. You don't walk through fire and stay unburned. You just stop being scared of the heat. Work filled the days, meetings, reports, rebuilding what he'd left behind. The company survived, but the people were different now, careful, polite, loyal, in a way that felt rehearsed. They looked at me like I might explode or disappear. Maybe both. I started going home early, but home didn't feel like a word that fit anymore. The house was too big, the silence too sharp. I kept bumping into ghosts, his shoes still under the bench, his jacket still hanging in the closet. I couldn't bring myself to throw them out. I told myself it was practicality. It was grief. One night I sat in the dark living room, no lights, just the city glow bleeding through the curtains. And for the first time, I felt the weight of everything I'd done, the patience, the planning, the precision. It was all control. But control isn't peace. It's just another cage with nicer walls. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who laughed too easily, who thought honesty would protect her. She was gone. I missed her. Denise called one morning. Marcus filed for bankruptcy, she said. I didn't respond right away. She added, he's losing everything, house, cars, assets. The court froze what's left. Does he know? I asked. He will by noon. I hung up and made coffee. When the machine started dripping, I realized my hands were shaking. Not from pity, not even from satisfaction, from recognition. I'd built part of that empire too, and now it was all turning to dust. That afternoon, a headline popped up on my phone, former CEO declares bankruptcy. Ex-wife declines comment. Declines. I liked that word. It meant choice. I drove to the lake house that weekend. The air was cold still. The dock creaked under my feet. That place used to be our escape. Now it was just quiet enough for the truth to breathe. I sat on the porch until sunset. Then headlights. A car stopped by the gate. Marcus stepped out. He looked older not by years, but by surrender. He didn't speak right away. Neither did I. Finally, he said, "You got what you wanted." I shook my head. "No, Marcus, I got what you gave away." He rubbed his face, laughed once, bitter hollow. "I never thought you'd go this far." I looked at him calm. "You should have. You taught me how." He nodded, almost proud. Then his voice cracked. "They won't hire me again." "You know that, right? I know. I'm sorry. It wasn't much." But it sounded like a man finally out of lies. We sat there, the lake flat as glass. For a moment, I almost reached for his hand. Then I remembered the nights he'd come home smelling of someone else's perfume, the way he'd smiled when he thought I didn't notice. "Do you need money?" I asked. He looked up, startled. "No." Then goodbye. He opened his mouth to say something else, but I'd already turned to leave. In the car, my hands were steady again. That's how I knew it was over. Driving back, I passed the sign for our old church, the one where we'd promised forever. I didn't stop. Forever had expired quietly. Back home, I poured a glass of wine and watched the city lights blink in the distance. They didn't sparkle. They pulsed slow, human, imperfect. I thought about what Denise once said. Justice isn't about who wins. It's about who can sleep at night. That night I slept, not deeply, not peacefully, but honestly. It's strange how quickly people move on. A year ago, I was the headline. Now I'm a paragraph in someone else's cautionary tale. That's how it works. Scandals fade faster than scars. The company stabilized. Profits returned. New leadership settled in, and I quietly stepped down. They called it a mutual decision. It wasn't. I was just tired of being the face of a story that never stopped echoing. I started consulting instead. Smaller projects, fewer eyes, no boardrooms full of politics disguised as ambition. Freedom came in invoices and silence, no applause, no knives. But every now and then I'd catch myself glancing at the old building when I drove past downtown. The logo still gleamed under the morning light. Different CEO, same empire. And I wondered if any of them ever thought about the woman who built it quietly, the one who smiled through humiliation and then dismantled the kingdom brick by brick. Sometimes in the quiet hours before dawn, I'd think about Marcus. Denise said he moved to Arizona, cheaper taxes, slower gossip. He'd sent one email a few months after our last meeting. Just one line, "I hope you're happy." I didn't reply. Happiness wasn't the right word. Peace doesn't sparkle, it hums. Still, I won't lie, I thought about him. Not with longing, but with curiosity. How a man could have everything and still gamble it all away. How love can turn into paperwork. I tried dating once, a kind man from a consulting firm. He liked jazz red wine and used words like "we" too easily. After the second dinner, he said, "You seem guarded." I smiled. "I'm not guarded. I'm just done auditioning." He didn't call again. Truth is, after Marcus, everyone felt like an echo, and echoes don't build anything new. One night I attended a charity event downtown, a fundraiser for women entrepreneurs. A journalist approached me, notebook ready. "Would you ever tell your story publicly?" she asked. I said I already did. "Just not out loud." She looked puzzled. I didn't explain. The story isn't the point. The survival is. A young woman at my table leaned over. "I watched the hearing online," she said. "You didn't flinch once," I smiled. "That's because I practiced in silence for years." On my way out, I stopped by the old piano in the corner of the hotel lobby. I used to play before life got too loud. I sat down and pressed one key, middle C. It rang clean and steady, no cracks, no discord, just a single honest note. That night at home, I opened the last box I hadn't touched, the one labeled marriage. Inside were photos, letters, small gifts. I didn't cry. I just studied the handwriting, the smiles, the illusion of permanence. Then I took it all to the fireplace. The flames didn't roar, they whispered. Paper curls fast when it's ready to forget. By morning, the box was gone, and the house finally felt like mine. A few days later, I met Denise for lunch. She looked at me, grinning. "You seem lighter," she said. "I cleaned my closet," I replied. She laughed. Literal or metaphorical, both. We ordered coffee and talked about nothing recipes, weather, her new case. For once, life didn't feel like a strategy meeting. When the check came, she reached for it. I said, "I've got it." She raised an eyebrow. "Revenge pays well." I smiled. Peace does. That evening, I walked by the water near my apartment. The wind was soft, the city lights steady. A couple nearby argued, then laughed, and for some reason it made me smile. People still loved, still hurt, still tried. And that somehow made everything feel normal again. I stopped by a flower stand and bought a single white lily, not for Marcus, not for me. Just because it was beautiful, and for once, beauty didn't have to mean anything. At home, I placed it in a glass jar by the window. It caught the last light of the day gold, gentle and clean. I stood there watching it and realized this was what victory really looked like. Not headlines, not courtrooms, just quiet acceptance that you made it out alive. And for the first time in a long time, I whispered to the empty room, "I'm okay. Not strong, not brave, just okay." And that was enough. The first anniversary of the trial came and went without notice. No reporters, no articles, just another Tuesday with a sky too blue to match the memories. I woke early that morning, poured coffee, and opened the curtains. The city was waking up, taxis, joggers, office lights flickering to life. For once, I didn't feel behind. I wasn't chasing, defending, or pretending, just existing. But peace can be a strange companion. It's soft, but it echoes. Sometimes it sounds like loneliness. I spent the day sorting through old work emails for a client. Midway through, I stumbled upon one from Marcus dated 6 years ago. "We're unstoppable, Claire, as long as we trust each other." It stopped me. The arrogance, the sincerity, both real, both extinct. I closed the laptop. Some memories aren't wounds, they're fingerprints. You can't erase them, but they stop hurting once you accept they're part of your skin. That evening I met an old colleague for dinner, Sam, our former CFO. He'd stayed neutral through the chaos which I respected. Over steak and wine, he said, "You know the company still uses your financial model. They just changed the name." I laughed. "Typical." He nodded. "You ever miss it?" "The power or the purpose?" I asked. He smiled. "Either." Sometimes I admitted, but not enough to start over. He raised his glass. To clean exits. I raised mine. To knowing when to leave. After dinner, we walked out into the cool air. Downtown shimmered all glass and ambition. Sam said, "Funny how cities forget faster than people." "Maybe that's why they survive," I said. When I got home, there was a small envelope on the floor. No stamp, just slipped under the door. I froze. It wasn't Marcus's handwriting, it was Emily's. Inside was a short letter. "I wanted you to know I left him a year ago." I started over. New city, new work, new peace. I thought you'd want to hear that. Thank you for not hating me when you could have. I read it twice, then once more slower. It didn't sting. It didn't heal either. It just settled. I folded it neatly and placed it in the drawer with a single word whispered under my breath, "Good." That night, I dreamed of the lake. Marcus was there, standing on the dock, looking at the water. He didn't speak, neither did I. In the dream, it didn't matter. We were both ghosts passing through the same silence. When I woke, sunlight was spilling across the room. I made coffee again like always. Routine, the safest kind of faith. By noon, I'd finished client calls and decided to visit my mother. She lived 2 hours away in a quiet suburb. We hadn't talked much during the storm. I'd kept her safe from the noise. When I arrived, she hugged me longer than usual. She said, "You look peaceful." "I'm learning," I told her. We sat on the porch, watching kids ride bikes down the street. Mom said, "You always were strong." I shook my head. "No, I was scared. I just didn't show it." She smiled. "That's still strength. We talked about everything except Marcus." That was our silent agreement. Some chapters don't need revisiting to stay closed. As the sun went down, she asked, "Do you think you'll ever love again?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I said. "But it'll be different. Not about saving someone, about being safe with someone." She nodded, satisfied. Then she squeezed my hand and said softly, "You already sound like yourself again." Driving home that night, I felt something shift, small but certain. The past wasn't following me anymore. It was behind me, finally staying where it belonged. When I got home, I stood at the window where the white lily used to be. It had wilted days ago, but I hadn't replaced it. Now I did. Fresh stem, new bloom, same glass jar. I watched it catch the light again, soft, steady, alive. Somewhere in that reflection, I realized revenge had never been the ending. It was the bridge, and I'd finally crossed it. The first winter without him came quietly. No storms, no headlines. Just shorter days and the kind of cold that makes you slow down long enough to feel things again. I'd moved to a smaller apartment, by then, 2 rooms, 1 balcony, 1 peace of mind. No marble counters, no photographs that hurt. The kind of place where silence felt earned, not imposed. My mornings became rituals, coffee, a walk by the river, work if I wanted, rest if I didn't. I'd stopped measuring productivity in hours and started counting it in breaths. Sometimes I'd see couples walking together, hands brushing, laughing at nothing. And instead of bitterness, I felt something softer, gratitude, not for what I had lost, but for what I had survived. One afternoon, a letter arrived from the court, the final closure notice. All proceedings resolved, all assets finalized. No appeals, no noise. For the first time in years, the legal world had nothing left to say about me. I placed the envelope in a drawer and left it unopened. Peace doesn't need paperwork. Later that evening, I met Denise for dinner. She was radiant, already talking about her retirement plans. "I'm buying a boat," she said. "Going to sail until I forget everyone's secrets." I laughed. "That's a long trip." She raised her glass. "To clean endings." I hesitated, then said, "To honest ones." After dinner, I walked home through the cold air. The streets glowed with Christmas lights, tiny, deliberate reminders that life keeps going. Each window I passed held a story I'd never know. It felt good not to be in any of them. When I reached my building, the doorman handed me a small package. No return address. Inside was a leather-bound notebook, the kind Marcus used to carry. A single note was tucked inside, not for apology, for understanding. I didn't know what peace cost until I lost it. You were right. Some lessons come too late. No signature. But I didn't need one. I closed the notebook gently and set it on the shelf, not as forgiveness, but as proof that time eventually humbles everyone. Days turned into weeks. Work stayed steady. Life stayed small. And the quiet no longer felt empty. Sometimes I'd wake before dawn and sit on the balcony wrapped in a blanket listening to the hum of the city, not the chaos I used to rule, but the pulse I'd finally joined again. And in those hours before the sun took its turn, I'd think of the people who'd watched my story, women, men, strangers, and I'd wonder what they took from it. If they saw revenge, they missed it. If they saw strength, maybe they caught the truth. Because what I wanted wasn't victory, it was voice. To be heard once clearly after a decade of quiet. And I was. The rest didn't matter. One morning, a young woman stopped me near the cafe. "You're Claire Thompson, right?" she asked. I nodded cautiously. She smiled nervously. "I just wanted to say, you helped me leave." I froze. Leave what? My boss, my fiancé. Both, actually. She laughed, but it cracked in the middle. "You made it look possible. I didn't know what to say, so I just touched her arm." "Good," I said. "Just make sure you leave for yourself, not against them." She nodded, tears at the edge of her voice. Then she left. That night I sat down at my desk and finally opened my laptop to write something new. Not a statement, not a defense. Just a letter to myself, to the woman who once believed silence was strength, who thought endurance was love, who forgot that letting go could also be a form of winning. It wasn't polished. It wasn't meant for anyone else. But as I typed, I realized I'd found the one thing I thought I'd lost my own tone. Soft, honest, certain. The sound of someone who doesn't need to prove she survived because survival itself is proof. When I finished, I printed it and placed it next to the white lily by the window. Outside, the city lights flickered like they always did, indifferent but alive. I watched them for a long time, then whispered to the room, to the air, to myself, "I forgive us." And just like that, the story that started with humiliation and ended with truth finally stopped echoing. You know, a story like this isn't just about revenge. It's about remembering who you were before the hurt. If Claire's voice reminded you of your own pause, breathe, and share this story with someone who might need it tonight. And if you want to hear more stories like hers, real, quiet, strong, subscribe, stay close, and keep listening. Because sometimes healing begins with a story that sounds a little too much like yours.